You're in the middle of an important conversation and suddenly you feel that tightness in your chest. Your heart races, your hands start to sweat, and before you know it, your mind is racing in 1,000 different directions. You try to focus on what the person is saying, but there's an internal voice screaming that you're going to say something stupid, that everyone will notice your insecurity, that you should have stayed home. And the worst part is, you have no idea how to turn it off. It's like there's a machine inside you running at full speed, producing anxiety, doubt, and fear non-stop, and you never received the instruction manual. This happens again when you try to sleep, when you need to make an important decision, when you're alone in the car driving home from work. You've tried deep breathing, you've tried positive thinking, you've tried ignoring it, but none of that works for more than a few minutes. It's frustrating to realize that other people seem to have control over their own minds while you're constantly fighting yours. You feel like a passenger inside your own life, watching your automatic reactions sabotage your goals, your relationships, your peace. And with each passing day, this feeling of helplessness only grows because you know you're wasting time and energy fighting a force that seems much bigger than you. But here's the truth no one told you. It's not your fault that you don't know how to control this internal machine. No one taught you. You grew up learning math, history, geography, but no one ever sat down with you and explained how your mind actually works. No one showed you that there's a system operating inside you 24 hours a day, a system that was programmed over millions of years of evolution and shaped by your experiences since childhood. You're not weak for failing to control something you never learned to operate. Henry Ford revolutionized the world when he discovered that any process can be mastered if you understand how it works and create the right system to manage it. And that's exactly what you're going to learn now. How to identify the mechanisms of this internal machine, how to recognize the patterns it's running on autopilot, and most importantly, how to take control and reprogram this system to work for you, not against you. Because once you understand how your mind operates, everything changes. Let's start with the basics. Your mind is literally a factory, and like any factory, it has 3 essential components: raw material input, production process, and product output. The raw material is your experiences, everything you see, hear, feel, and perceive throughout the day. The production process is how your mind interprets, analyzes, and processes these experiences, and the final product is your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Now, here's the problem. Most people live as if they own a factory that's been running on autopilot for years, producing poor results. But they've never stopped to look at the production line and identify where the defect is. When Henry Ford created the assembly line, he wasn't just trying to make cars faster, he was proving a fundamental principle. When you break down a complex process into smaller steps and understand exactly what happens in each one, you gain complete control over the outcome. Your mind works the same way. That anxiety attack that seems to come out of nowhere isn't random. It's the result of a specific sequence of mental processes that you can learn to identify and modify. But to do this, you first need to understand how this mental production line actually operates. There's a circuit in your brain called the limbic system. This system is like the security department of your mental factory, always alert, always searching for threats. It was programmed thousands of years ago when your ancestors needed to detect real dangers, like predators or rival tribes. The problem is this system hasn't evolved to deal with the modern world. It can't differentiate between a lion chasing you and your boss calling you into a meeting. For your limbic system, any uncomfortable situation is treated as a threat to survival. And when it detects a threat, it triggers a cascade of chemical reactions in your body: cortisol, adrenaline, increased heart rate, rapid breathing. All of this happens before you have a chance to think rationally about the situation. Now, here comes the interesting part. There's another component in your mental factory called the prefrontal cortex. This is your executive command center, the part responsible for logical thinking, planning, and impulse control. This is where your rationality lives. The problem is the prefrontal cortex is much slower than the limbic system. It's like having a security department that triggers alarms and locks doors in milliseconds, while the general manager takes minutes to arrive and assess whether there's really danger. Most of the time, by the time you can finally think clearly about a situation, your body is already flooded with stress hormones, and you've already reacted automatically. The Stoics discovered this over 2,000 years ago. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome and Stoic philosopher, wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He wasn't talking about positive thinking or forced emotional control. He was describing exactly what modern neuroscience confirms. You can't prevent your mind from generating automatic thoughts and emotions, but you can learn not to be enslaved by them. The key is understanding there's a fundamental difference between what your mental machine automatically produces and how you choose to respond to that production. Think of it like a production conveyor belt. Thoughts and emotions are constantly rolling along this belt, coming off your mind's automatic assembly line. Most people think they need to grab every item on that belt, examine it, react to it, do something with it. But you don't. You can simply observe the item passing and consciously decide whether it's worth picking up or letting it go. That's the difference between reacting and responding. Reaction is automatic. It comes from the factory's programming. Response is intentional. It comes from the conscious operator you can become. But there's an even bigger problem in this story. Your mental factory doesn't just produce isolated thoughts. It produces loops, closed circuits that feed themselves and strengthen every time you repeat them. This happens because of a phenomenon called neuroplasticity. Every time you think a thought or act in a certain way, you're literally creating and strengthening specific neural connections in your brain. It's like creating tracks in your factory. The more you use a specific track, the wider and easier to traverse it becomes. Eventually, these tracks become the default path your mind automatically follows. That's why you always react the same way in similar situations. It's not lack of willpower. It's that you have deeply established neural tracks that automatically guide your mind to certain patterns. When you feel anxiety in a social situation, it's not because you chose to feel anxious. It's because over years, perhaps decades, you've created and reinforced a neural track that connects social situations with anxiety response. And now, whenever a social situation appears, your mind automatically follows that track, producing anxiety as the final result. The good news is neuroplasticity works both ways. Just as you created these tracks through repetition, you can create new tracks through deliberate practice. It's not easy and it's not quick, but it's absolutely possible. Henry Ford proved you can completely redesign a production line if you're willing to do the necessary engineering work. The same applies to your mind. You're not stuck with the patterns you have today. You're only stuck as long as you keep running the same processes you've always run. Now let me show you exactly how these patterns operate day to day. Let's take a concrete example. Procrastination. You have an important task to do. You know you need to do it. You even want to do it. But when the moment comes to start, something inside you resists. You feel a slight sensation of discomfort, almost imperceptible. Your brain, always seeking immediate comfort, offers an alternative. Check your phone, make coffee, organize your desk. Anything but start the task. You accept the alternative because it offers instant relief from that discomfort. And what happens? You receive a small dose of dopamine, the reward neurotransmitter. Here's the problem. Your brain just learned a lesson. Feel discomfort facing difficult task. Divert to easy activity. Receive chemical reward. That's a complete feedback circuit. And every time you repeat this cycle, you're training your mental factory to produce procrastination as the default response to challenging tasks. It's not laziness. It's not lack of discipline. It's neural engineering operating exactly as it was designed. The problem isn't you, it's the system that's running. The Stoics had a concept to deal with this, the dichotomy of control. Epictetus, one of the greatest Stoic philosophers, said we suffer not from events themselves, but from the view we take of them. Translating to factory language, you can't control what raw material enters your mental factory, but you can completely control how you process that raw material. You can't prevent your brain from feeling discomfort facing a difficult task, but you can choose not to automatically follow the escape impulse that discomfort generates. Let me stop here for a second and ask a question maybe no one has ever asked you. What's the worst part of living with this feeling of not having control over your own mind? Not what you tell people, but the part you carry in silence, the one that wakes you up at dawn, or appears when you're alone in the car. I want you to know something. What you're feeling is more common than you imagine. Thousands of people watch this video every day carrying exactly the same weight you carry. If you have the courage, leave a comment telling what that worst part is for you. It can be something simple like, "The worst part is feeling stuck," or "The worst part is not being able to trust myself." Your honesty will make someone else feel less alone today, and sometimes that's exactly what someone needs to hear to take the first step. Now, let me continue showing you how to break this pattern. The first thing you need to understand is your mind is constantly producing two types of content: signal and noise. Signal is useful information that deserves your attention and response. Noise is automatic production with no real value. The problem is most people treat all mental output as if it were important signal. You have an anxious thought and immediately assume that thought represents a truth about reality, but it doesn't. It's just noise your mental factory produced based on old programming and established patterns. Henry Ford had a simple principle in his factory. Identify what adds value and eliminate everything that doesn't. He called this waste elimination. In your mind, thoughts that don't serve you are pure waste. It doesn't matter how many you produce. It doesn't matter how convincing they seem. If they don't help you live better, they're just noise taking up space on the production line. The ability to distinguish signal from noise is perhaps the most important skill you can develop. And the Stoics created specific tools for this. One of these tools is what they called prosoch, or attention. Not attention in the common sense, but an active vigilance over your own mental processes. It's like placing a supervisor on your mental factory's production line, someone whose only function is to observe what's being produced and ask, is this useful? Is this adding value? Is this bringing me closer to who I want to be? Without this active supervisor, your factory will continue producing on autopilot, generating the same output it always generated. But here comes the real challenge. This supervisor needs to be trained. You don't wake up one day with the ability to observe your thoughts objectively. It's a skill that needs to be developed through deliberate practice, and the method the Stoics used to train this ability was ingeniously simple. They did regular mental check-ins throughout the day. Seneca, another great Stoic, described how every evening he asked himself, "What bad emotion did I conquer today? What vice did I resist? In what aspect am I better?" He was literally doing quality auditing of his mental factory. You can implement this now. Set 3 alarms on your phone throughout the day. When the alarm rings, stop for 30 seconds and ask 3 questions. What is my mind producing right now? Is this mental product serving me? If not, what product would I prefer to be producing? This seems too simple to work, but it's exactly this simplicity that gives the method power. You don't need complex techniques. You need consistent systems you can replicate every day. Ford didn't revolutionize industry with complicated technology. He revolutionized with simple processes executed with perfection. Now let's go one level deeper. You need to understand your mental factory doesn't operate in isolation. It's constantly receiving inputs from the external environment and your own body. And here's something crucial most people ignore. The state of your body directly affects the type of output your mind produces. When you're sleepy, hungry, haven't moved physically for hours, your mental factory can't operate at ideal capacity. It's like trying to run a production line with poorly maintained machines and unstable energy. You can have the best processes in the world, but if the basic infrastructure is compromised, the result will be poor. The Stoics understood this perfectly. They didn't see mind and body as separate entities. but as parts of an integrated system. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the importance of keeping the body in adequate condition, not as an end in itself, but as support for the mind to function well. He practiced daily physical exercises, had discipline with sleep, ate in moderation. Not out of vanity, but because he knew a tired, poorly fed, and sedentary machine operator can't operate anything with excellence. Here's your first practical protocol. Before trying to fix your mind, fix the infrastructure. For the next 7 days, treat your body as if it were the power plant that feeds your mental factory. Sleep 7 to 8 hours per night. It's not luxury, it's basic maintenance. Move your body at least 30 minutes a day. Doesn't need to be gym, can be a walk. Eat real food, not processed junk. And drink enough water. These aren't generic healthy living advice. They're technical requirements for your mental machine to operate at full capacity. And here comes the part most people don't want to hear. You need to control your inputs. Remember, your mind is a factory that processes raw material. Well, the quality of the raw material directly determines the quality of the final product. If you spend hours a day consuming negative, dramatic, angry content, your mental factory will process that input and produce corresponding thoughts and emotions, not because you're negative by nature, but because that's how systems work. Garbage in, garbage out. Henry Ford was obsessed with the quality of materials entering his factory. He knew there's no point having the best assembly process if the steel is weak or the parts are defective. Your mind works exactly like this. You can have all the mental control techniques in the world, but if you're constantly feeding your mind with bad inputs, you'll continue producing bad output. This means you need to make hard choices about what you consume. Social media, news, conversations, even the people you spend time with. The Stoics had a brutal exercise for this. They called it memento mori, remember you will die. It wasn't morbid, it was practical. When you remember your time on this planet is limited, you automatically become more selective about how you spend that time and what you feed your mind. You stop consuming any garbage that appears in front of you and start asking, is this worth the cost in terms of my attention and mental peace? Most of the time, the answer is no. So, here's your second protocol. For the next 7 days, do an information fast. Cut news, cut social media, cut any content designed to generate strong emotional reactions. I know this sounds radical, but you're not trying to live like this forever. You're doing a controlled experiment to see how your mental factory operates when you're not constantly injecting flammable fuel into it. At the end of these 7 days, pay attention to the difference. You'll probably notice your mind is calmer, clearer, more capable of processing information rationally instead of reactively. But all this is just preparation. Now comes the real engineering, reprogramming your mind's automatic circuits. And here the Stoics had a tool that was pure genius: negative visualization, or what they called premeditatio malorum. The idea is simple, but execution requires discipline. You deliberately imagine the worst things that can happen in situations you face. Not to torture yourself, but to remove the power these situations have over you through fear of the unknown. It works like this. You have an important presentation tomorrow and you're anxious. Instead of trying to suppress the anxiety or think positive, you do the opposite. You close your eyes and vividly imagine the worst possible version of that presentation. You freeze in the middle, forget what you were going to say. People laugh. Your boss is disappointed. You imagine all of this in detail, and then you ask yourself, if this happens, do I survive? And the answer is always yes. You survive. Your life continues. The world doesn't end. What you just did is hack your mind's fear system. Remember the limbic system I mentioned earlier, that security department that triggers alarms. It operates based on perceived threats, not real threats. When you deliberately visualize the worst scenario and recognize you can survive it, you're telling your limbic system, this isn't a threat to survival. It's just temporary discomfort. And with repetition, your brain learns not to treat the situation as an emergency. The alarm stops ringing, or at least decreases in volume significantly. Here's your third protocol. Every night before sleep, Take the situation that makes you most anxious for the next day. Dedicate 5 minutes to visualizing the worst possible outcome of that situation. Be specific and realistic, and then answer 3 questions. Would I survive this? What lessons would I learn? How could I grow from this experience? You'll discover that most things that scare you lose power when you face them directly instead of avoiding them. But there's an even deeper layer to all this. The Stoics discovered something that modern psychology took centuries to validate. The problem isn't having negative thoughts and emotions. The problem is identifying with them. When you think, "I am anxious," you've transformed a temporary state into permanent identity. When you think, "I am a procrastinator," you've taken a behavior that can be changed and transformed it into who you are at a fundamental level. This is a catastrophic error in mental engineering. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have the power to withdraw your mind from any disturbance at any moment." He wasn't saying you can stop feeling emotions. He was saying you can stop identifying with them. There's a huge difference between "I feel anxiety" and "I am anxious." In the first, you're acknowledging a temporary product of your mental factory. In the second, you're confusing the product with the producer. You are not the thoughts and emotions your mind produces. You are the operator who can observe this production and choose how to respond. This distinction isn't abstract philosophy, it's crucial practice. When you identify with your negative thoughts, you have no choice but to act according to them. After all, if you are anxious, then it's natural to avoid situations that cause anxiety. If you are a procrastinator, then it's expected that you procrastinate. But when you understand you are not your thoughts, you create space between stimulus and response. And in that space is your freedom. Henry Ford had a famous phrase, "Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right." He was describing exactly this phenomenon. Your mind is producing exactly what you've programmed it to produce through your beliefs about yourself. If you believe you're someone who can't control anxiety, your mind will produce evidence that confirms that belief. If you believe you're someone who's learning to operate your mental machine more efficiently, your mind will seek information and create behaviors that support that narrative. The factory operator defines what the factory produces. Your 4th protocol is a daily separation exercise. Every time you catch yourself identifying with a negative mental state, correct the language. Don't say, "I am anxious," say, "I am experiencing anxiety now." Don't say, "I am a failure." Say, "I failed at this specific task." It seems subtle, but this language change fundamentally reprograms how your mind processes experiences. You're training your mental factory to produce objective observations instead of identity judgments. Now let's talk about the most difficult and most important element of all: consistency. Everything I've shown you so far works, but only if you do it repeatedly. A Stoic exercise done once doesn't reprogram anything. It's like expecting a factory to change its entire production line because you adjusted one machine one day. Transformation comes from systematic repetition. And here most people fail, not because they don't know what to do, but because they don't have a system to ensure they do it. Henry Ford didn't depend on motivation to keep his factory running. He created systems, processes, checklists, routines that ensured production happened regardless of how he felt on any given day. You need to do the same with your mind. Don't rely on motivation. Motivation is inconsistent fuel. Create systems that work even when you're not motivated. And a system needs 3 components: clarity about what to do, when to do it, and how to measure if it's working. Clarity about what to do. You already have this. I've given you 4 specific protocols. Take care of physical infrastructure. Control your inputs. Practice negative visualization. Separate yourself from your mental states. These aren't vague suggestions, they're concrete actions. When to do it. Here you need to be specific. Don't say, "I'll do it when I have time." Say, "I'll do it every day at 6 in the morning right after waking up," or "I'll do it every evening before dinner." Specific timing transforms intention into habit. How to measure if it's working. Here, most people err. They expect to feel different immediately, and when they don't, they assume it's not working and give up. But neural change takes time. You're literally rebuilding circuits in your brain. This doesn't happen in days, it happens in weeks or months. So you need metrics that show incremental progress. It can be as simple as marking an X on the calendar each day you completed your protocols. After 30 days, you have 30 X's looking at you. Physical evidence you're doing the work. Here's the truth. No one wants to tell you because it doesn't sell courses or books, there's no shortcut. You won't wake up tomorrow with complete control over your mind. You won't watch this video and magically stop being anxious or a procrastinator. But you can wake up tomorrow and do the first day of consistent work to rebuild your mental factory. And you can do it again the next day, and the next. And in 6 months, when you look back, you'll realize you're not the same person who started. Not because you had a mystical transformation, but because you did the necessary mental engineering work. The Stoics had a concept called amor fati, love of fate. It wasn't about passively accepting everything that happens. It was about recognizing you can't change what already happened or what's happening now, but you can absolutely choose how to respond and what to do next. Your mind has produced bad patterns for years, maybe decades. You didn't choose this. It happened through a combination of genetics, environment, experiences. But now that you know how it works, now that you have the tools, the responsibility is yours. You can continue being a passenger in your own mind, or you can take control of the operation. Henry Ford started as a common mechanic. He didn't have formal engineering education, but he had something more important. He believed any system can be understood and improved if you're willing to do the work. He dismantled engines, studied each component, tested modifications, failed hundreds of times, and eventually he revolutionized not just the automotive industry, but all modern manufacturing. You have the same opportunity with your mind. It's a system. Systems can be understood. Systems can be optimized. And you have all the necessary tools to do this. So here's what happens now. You have a choice. You can close this video, feel inspired for a few minutes, and then return to the same patterns you've always had. Or you can treat this as the beginning of a long-term engineering project. Today is day 1. You're going to implement the 4 protocols I gave you. You're going to do this tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow. Not perfectly, you'll fail on some days, but you'll continue because now you understand you're not trying to motivate yourself to change, you're building systems for transformation. And here's something important you need to know. 3 weeks from now, maybe a month, you'll have a day where everything seems not to be working. You'll feel as anxious or stuck as you always have. And at that moment, you'll question whether all this effort is worth it. I want you to know now that day will come. And when it comes, I want you to remember this. That's not the day that proves nothing changed. That's the day that tests whether you really understood the fundamental principle. You're not trying to eliminate bad days. You're building the capacity to continue operating your mental factory functionally, even on bad days. Ford didn't expect his factory to never have problems. He expected that when problems appeared, the system would be robust enough to continue producing. Your mind will have bad days. There will be moments where old patterns appear with full force. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you're human and you're in the middle of the process, not at the end. What matters isn't the absence of bad days, it's how you operate on those days. Do you return to old patterns completely, or do you use the tools you now have to navigate through them more functionally? The Stoics practiced something they called the view from above. When they were in the middle of a difficult situation, they imagined observing that situation from very far away, as if they were viewing from above. From far away, individual problems seem smaller. From far away, you see the bigger pattern, the complete journey, not just the difficult moment. When you're having a bad day, practice the view from above. Imagine looking at your life from a year from now. From that viewpoint, that bad day is just one point on a much larger line. The line that matters isn't whether today was good or bad. The line that matters is the general direction you're following. If you're doing the work consistently, if you're implementing the systems, if you're treating your mind as a factory that needs continuous maintenance and optimization, then you're on the right line. It doesn't matter how many bad days appear along the way. Ford had massive setbacks before creating the assembly line. He had factories that failed, cars that didn't work, investors who gave up on him. But the general direction was clear. He was learning, adjusting, improving. And eventually, he achieved the breakthrough. Your mental journey will follow the same pattern. Now, before finishing, let me give you a final tool that integrates everything. The Stoics ended each day with a reflection exercise. They asked themselves 3 things. What did I do well today? Where did I fail? How can I improve tomorrow? This wasn't about moral judgment or guilt. It was quality control. If you run a factory and never analyze the day's production, you'll never know what's working and what needs to be adjusted. Your mind deserves the same attention. Every evening, take 5 minutes. It can be before sleep, it can be while brushing your teeth. Ask these 3 questions, and be honest in the answers. If you practiced your protocols, acknowledge that. If you return to old patterns at some point, acknowledge that too without punishing yourself, and identify one specific thing you can do differently tomorrow. One thing, not 10. 1. Consistent incremental improvement is much more powerful than large sporadic changes. Henry Ford didn't build the assembly line in one day. He optimized one small process, then another, then another. Each individual optimization was small, but the compound effect over time was revolutionary. Your mental transformation will follow the same principle. You don't need to fix everything today. You need to improve one small process today, and repeat that tomorrow, and continue. 6 months of daily 1% improvement isn't 6% better. It's complete transformation. That's simple mathematics of compound systems. If you made it this far, I already know something important about you. You don't just want to survive your own mind, you want to master it. And that tells me you're exactly the type of person who belongs to this community. This channel isn't about magical promises or overnight transformations. It's about real people sharing real tools that work in the real world. Every week, I bring a new perspective on how your mind works, and more importantly, how you can work with it, not against it. If this makes sense to you, subscribe to the channel. Not because I'm asking, but because you deserve to have a place where you can learn to build the version of yourself you always knew was inside. The next video is already ready, and I'm sure it will add one more piece to the puzzle of your transformation. See you there.